I think, to think about in terms of our research. It makes me think about something I've mentioned to you, that one of the things I think we've got wrong in the policy from the past is that we've addressed this a little bit in the copyright area, but I think the patents area in the legal framework is really calling out for this. We've got pockets of people working in centres of excellence, but they're cloistered and we're not getting the flow across of the knowledge, and that's leading to gaps in knowledge, what I would call side effects, where there are really costs that we have to bear because people won't talk to each other. But one of the problems, one of the forces that causes that are things like patents. And I'm not saying we should get rid of patents, but I think we need to work out how we can practice patents while still engage in that sort of sharing of knowledge process. And I know there are others out there thinking about this, but I'd like to see how we can get that into the policy framework some more. And CSIRO being one of the leading patent holders in the country would be a great sort of example, or a great role model as maybe how we could perhaps do this into the future.
But it goes to the fundamental challenge that we organise our world in silos, whether it's an organisation or properties, patents. And all the challenges of innovation are about crossing those boundaries, linking silos, so we've got this constant tension. And I find it really interesting. One of the biggest challenges in the CSIRO, for example, in the Board of Commercial Committee, is getting people, when they think about patents, to think about broad potential fields of use. If people think about it in terms of the area that they came from when they developed that patent, and not its potential application in all sorts of other areas. So the scope, for example, genetic patents developed around plant or animal applications, then they're useful in human, or the way we say bioengineering that applied in renewable processing. If you're not developing patent frameworks that actually enable those transfers, you're foregoing a huge amount of potential benefit.
Thank you, Terry, again for a really wide-ranging We're going straight on now to our Convergence panel. I'd like to invite Malcolm and Richard and Terry to come up here, and we'll get somewhere for you to sit.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, there wasn't so. Yeah, okay. Usually, instead of these ice rather than it wasn't like ice. Well, it's amazing.
Oh, I get it.
Very
So I'll let you know once they're
And I'll go over to the side so you're not. Yes, you do, unless you want to. You might want to stand there so you can see this.
That's it. I'll probably Yes, sure.
The stand will be there, so
Okay. Some of the today is just Okay, I think we're going. A little change. This is the Convergence panel. It's session 2 in today's proceedings, and it's interesting that the term convergence is both the name of the panel, but also the name of one of the reviews that we are going to hear about from one of the speakers on the panels, because there's actually some very interesting convergence around reviews going on at the federal level this year. There is a convergence review, which is a review of broadcasting, telecommunications and radio communications. There's a national cultural policy being developed and a classification review. They're each coming out of different portfolios at a federal level. So the first one is coming out of the broadband communications in the digital economy portfolio. National cultural policy is coming out of the Arts Office in Prime Minister and Cabinet. And the classification review is coming out of Attorney General. So different departments, but all of them converging in different ways on the media, communications and cultural sectors and the laws and regulations that pertain to them. So, I mean, some of these points of convergence across these three processes, think about the question of appropriate access to content, which is an issue for both the Convergence Review and the Classification Review. Issues of community standards and expectations are found in both of those areas. Another example would be the question of Australian content and cultural identity, which is very much shared between Convergence and the National Cultural Policy. And certainly questions of broadband and the opportunities for the growth of both content production and delivery, particularly to underserviced communities in, say, Australia's regions, are issues that are common across at least two of these processes. So that's why we've called it a convergence panel. But you didn't come to listen to me, you've come to listen to the three people who are leading these reviews and processes. So the first speaker is Malcolm Long. I won't go into Malcolm's full biography, it's in your papers. Malcolm has been a key figure in convergence issues in Australia for decades. He's held senior positions at SBS, at ABC. He currently is chair of a key broadband innovation centre based in Sydney, as well as the chair of NIDA. And he has been a great friend of the Centre of Excellence for many years as well. So we really welcome you, Malcolm, to this Convergence panel. Richard Eccles who is the Deputy Secretary in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. He's the senior official who has responsibility for the National Cultural Policy process under Minister Crean, and he has been a public official for 20 years and has a very strong humanities and social sciences background. So welcome, Richard. Wonderful to have you here. And Terry Flew will be known to most of us as a professor of media and communication here in creative industries at QUT and a chief investigator in the Centre of Excellence, but seconded for the purposes of the Classification Review as lead commissioner to the Australian Law Reform Commission. So welcome back, Terry, for a short time to home here, and a very big welcome to you in your new role. So enough from me. Each speaker will address questions not only of what's going on in their review or inquiry process, but also talk a little bit about ways in which they do converge with the others. So firstly, over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Stuart, and it is great to be here at the CCI conference today. Terry broke his rule and had the audio up today. I'm doing something even more outrageous. I've got the audio visuals and you don't, but I'm using that new platform, the Human Voice, to do my presentation. Which is really in a couple of parts. I'll talk a bit about the Convergence Review, which I and two colleagues, Glenn Borum and Louise Mackelboga, are currently conducting. And I'll talk a little bit about how that review sits in relation to the other activities that Stuart's mentioned and that are represented by our colleagues here. And then thirdly, I'll talk a little about, from my experience and perception, what are some of the difficulties in getting coherent creative industries recognition and response, and how that might link with some research agendas that you might consider. So they're the three areas. The Convergence Review, you are hopefully aware of its existence, is extraordinarily broad, frighteningly so in some senses. Just to remind you of the basic purpose of the Convergence Review that is underway. In the light of convergence, the committee is to review the current policy framework for the production and delivery of media content and communication services. The committee is to develop advice for government on appropriate policy frameworks, advise on ways of achieving it, advise on potential impacts of reform options on industry, consumers and community, and in the light of its views on a preferred policy framework for a converged environment, the committee is to advise on the principles that will underpin any new framework. So virtually the whole box and dice. And of course, one of the first challenges of the review has been to try and contain it and determine its breadth, but also, crucially, see how deep it is and get a view of what we think can be done in the time we've got available. So to some degree so far, as well as being very much in listening mode, we've been in the process of containing and compressing to see what we can do in the time scale we have, which is roughly 12 months. As I outlined there, we've been asked for some principles which will inform a new framework for converged media, and we have been undertaking a process to derive those principles. These are not necessarily principles which would appear in future legislation as objectives of the kind that exist in the Broadcasting Services Act, the Telecommunications Act and so on, but they are more principles that we will use to make decisions about recommendations. Now, they may end up bleeding into some operational legislation, but essentially they're guidelines for us when deciding between options for various recommendations. And we have gone through a process of consultation and review and have derived 10 principles which are on the Convergence Review website. I won't go through all of them,